Take 27.
Guys, we are in a small town in Switzerland and we are touring an 18-unit complex here, brand new construction. We're gonna walk you through a bunch of what's going on, but overall it's a hybrid again, where we have steel structure, concrete structure, as well as CLT. You're gonna see a lot of similar materials, but used in a lot of different ways, especially things like blue board and plaster and mineral wool insulation. So let's get into it. So we are in one of the 18 apartments here in this project, and in Switzerland, and I think a lot of parts of the world, an apartment isn't necessarily meaning it's a rental like we call in the US. These are actually all sold, so maybe we would consider them a condominium. But what we're looking at here is basically through rough. There's a lot of blue board up in the wall in preparation for plaster, but why I wanted to start here is basically how the structure is built. You have a steel I-beam here that goes back to a big steel column. It's gonna be on a big grid pattern, and in between, this is a CLT panel. So they're using the CLT panel for their floor framing. There's no floor joist underneath it. If you were to be underneath and it was unfinished, you'd see the backside of the wood panel here. That you're seeing the siga wet guard, and the reason that they install this on top of that CLT is a couple reasons. It's going to waterproof these panels during construction, so if you're working below, and if it happened to rain, it would not drip through. But it's really a temporary layer for construction. We're going to see in another unit that this floor actually gets built up quite high, about 12 inches to the finished elevation of this door. So you're going to have a rock base and then a concrete floor prior to your finished floor going in, which may be a wood floor, a tile, something like that. But you'll see that in another unit. All this Smurf tube or plastic conduit, this is how they run all of the electrical. Everything is 220 here in Switzerland, and everything is ran through this plastic conduit. So you're getting all of this installed. You're not running Romex or conduit through the walls. A lot of this runs on the floor and up to the location. See a great example here. This is going to be an outlet. And it looks as though they might have low voltage as well, probably have a triple outlet, and maybe some sort of low voltage, not quite sure. But this conduit is running up to this location here, and it even has another conduit heading into another direction, which is for likely the TV up here. So most commonly we use a lot of this blue Smurf tube for this exact reason. We put a big one up high for the TV and run it down low so we can run our HDMI cables and things like that. But they're using it for all of their electrical. So it's really interesting for me to see. Let's talk about this here. Blue board on this wall at the very lower. This is to allow them to bring that stone in, and then the concrete, basically allowing it not to spill into the stud cavity. Speaking of the stud cavities, all of the bearing walls were pre-manufactured off-site. So if you look closely, the top plate as well as the bottom plate, which you can't see, is notched. So all of these are located exactly where those notches are. They've predetermined the location of them. They predetermined exactly where all of this needs to be. And then they're just taking these studs and standing them up in the location of those notches to help support the CLT above. So similar construction in the sense that you have these wood frame walls, but you're also dealing with a laminated material that's really straight and going to give you a really smooth, really flat surface and prep for your blue board. Blue board is really common to us in Boston, but I know a lot of the US does not use it. They're using drywall. A couple differences here. Number one, they're doing 2 layers almost everywhere. And number two, they're prepping every joint with this V-groove, where this is going to get filled with plaster, mesh tape, and they're doing 2 coats of plaster. Now, as you think about what that means, that's a lot of work, but it's something that is a common trade here. And it is the most inexpensive way to do this, where other parts of the world, other parts of the US, is going to do more of a drywall system. The heating and cooling in this entire building is all done by radiant, and you actually have that as a radiant manifold, and this over here is where all of your water lines are. So the black conduit you're seeing on the floor is actually your hot and cold lines heading to, say, a kitchen sink or something similar. Same with the plumbing. All the plumbing is going to be down in that slab. Everything's wrapped in a foam, so as this thing gets encased and buried, it's up on a stand, your pitch is correct, This goes over to some sort of drain in the corner here. I'm guessing that this is likely a mechanical room, so maybe that's a floor drain in preparation for, you know, having a floor drain. Following the black conduit over here, this is where we have a bathroom. So you can see how that black conduit comes over and comes up, and it's a very similar and probably familiar looking PEX piece of piping that goes into a future wall faucet. And then their drain, they do use a lot of different fittings here. Black ABS piping rather than the PVC, and everything ties in behind that cavity. So that's a big service cavity where everything else is going to be in this living space. And then here is prepped for a shower, which we'll see. Why don't we head to that other unit and we'll see the stone on the floor. Up in the top floor, this is a stone. At first I thought it was just a pea stone, but as you walk on it, you realize it must have some sort of binder to it. So talking to the guys, you know, you can kind of scratch it up, pick it up, and when you squeeze it, there's a slight stickiness to it. And the reason that they have that is that as you walk on it and you compact it, it doesn't compress over time. They are using this for soundproofing. There's a few inches of it that is starting to bury this, you know, for example, this steel beam, and bringing your height of your floor up. But the primary use is for soundproofing. In the US, you might use something like gypcrete, homosote, cork, things like that. This is what they're using here. And then on top of this will be the concrete floor. We'll go into another unit and see that. But I just want you guys to get an understanding of how this floor system is starting to be put together. And you start to see how the electrical and all of that conduit that we saw in the last unit starts getting buried. Beyond that, the rest of the unit is still in pretty much the same shape here, because this is really that next step. Everything's been roughed. They can start hanging board, like I said. They're getting things up in the wall, and now they're getting the floor prepped from an elevation standpoint. And then as we get into this unit, this is where the concrete has been placed. And it's a pretty rough trowel finish. You see the foam gasket that they install all the way around, primarily to keep that concrete off of the wallboard. But this is, you know, something pretty traditional looking for us, where you have a bare concrete slab. But the fact of the matter is we're built up about 12 inches higher than we were off that wood deck, and I wanted to see if I could get a good view of it. But if I reach my hand down here, that's the wood deck, and you can see just how far down that is, and that's because they built up with that stone for soundproofing and then the concrete layer. And one thing I actually forgot about is after that stone is installed, that's when they'll install the radiant. And you don't see a lot of ductwork in here. There is some ductwork, but from a heating and cooling standpoint, they'll actually heat and cool every one of these units with radiant. And I say heat and cool, meaning that they'll run hot water when they need to bring, obviously, heat, and they'll run cool water when they need to cool the space down. In Switzerland, there's not a ton of air conditioning. It's something that, you know, not every building has. And from a ductwork perspective, any ductwork that you are going to see is going to be fresh air, and it's usually bringing in fresh air and exhausting stale air, similar to like an ERV or maybe an HRV scenario. All the wallboard has now been hung, and anytime that you do have a factory joint, you do have that automatic bevel, but you're seeing that they're adding the bevel. One question I asked is like, well, you have a beautiful CLT panel above you, you're protecting it so you don't have any water damage. Is that going to be exposed? And it's not. They actually will have plastic conduit run across and have your lighting installed, and they'll actually hang a gyp ceiling about 2 inches off of that CLT. So when all said and done, it's going to be a very traditional looking condo where you do have plastered walls, plastered ceilings, and essentially a big painted box. But you have the high performance, the insulation details here, heating and cooling system that is very intentional, the fresh air, which is obviously massively important to the indoor air quality. And you can't forget to mention what is almost standard in every building that we've walked is these awesome European tilt-turn windows. So again, just to remind you guys, you have a tilt option and a turn option. So almost every building, even some of the older retrofits, have these units, and they're much more high performance than a standard American-made window. And not to mention, we haven't even talked about the fact that all of these units have these awesome decks with views on both sides. There's mountains in the front of the building as well as the back of the building. Looking out and being interrupted by the guys from R&R. Here's a bunch of spools of that wire loom. It is not a split loom, it's solid. They have different colors. One question I didn't ask is what the difference is, but my assumption, because of a conversation I had earlier, most of the time it's blue, and I'm gonna guess that maybe low voltage is gonna be yellow, and then as we learn, the plumbing is being wrapped in black. But I also wanted to talk about the ductwork, because this right here is important, but you can see some of how important this ductwork is to be gasketed. Look at these gaskets here. So as this stuff is going together, double gasketed, it's a much better system I'm seeing with a lot of this stuff, with a more gasketed approach where you're not dealing with duct seal or even duct tape. And then here, right here, it's a steel piece of spiral duct, and it's got 1 inch of that rubber insulation on the outside. And this is, I'm noticing it in a lot of the common areas running up and down, and I believe what this is doing is it's tying back into the unit to give it that fresh air and make sure that you're constantly getting that fresh air and exchanging stale air within the unit to keep that indoor air quality up and at a premium. So we'll continue working our way down. Another detail, I've noticed a lot of stainless steel over copper. Anytime they have water lines, it's a stainless steel option. You're gonna again see the ABS pipe, which is black rather than like a PVC or a cast that you typically see in commercial. And even the fittings, are much different, and they're just much different. So as we come down, you'll start to really see the hybrid approach to this building. You have some mass concrete walls. It looks like to be, the elevator actually appears to be a precast wall. How about the tape light? And I'm assuming that is just for construction, but what a great and really efficient way to get that entire elevator shaft lit up for construction. You're gonna be working amongst, I believe it's 6 floors here, or maybe even more. I believe there's parking below us. But a really quick and easy way to just get that whole space lit up and not have to worry about running multiple lights. Going back to the Siga wet guard, I'm learning a lot about that product because we've used it before. I keep saying how it's a temporary construction product, and it's to protect the top of the CLT during construction, and ultimately when you place concrete on it, you don't want stuff leaking through. And why is that important? Well, beyond just being an annoyance and having to work down here if something was leaking, if this was truly to be exposed and and left as is, you certainly would not want water staining to be on the bottom, or even worse, concrete staining to be on the bottom. So by adding that wet guard, it's protecting it all the way through construction for water, for concrete, for anything spilling, and ultimately it gets covered up in construction and becomes null and void, but really protects the beauty of the CLT should this remain exposed. Now, I don't know about this particular space, but I do know that most of the space is going to get plastered ceiling, but it has me wanting to work with CLT because I think that could be an option to build a really beautiful house with a much different interior. As we work our way through here, so this is actually where you're gonna see the ramp down to the parking. A lot of times, especially in multifam, it's important to find a good place for parking, and when you're trying to maximize your site, so they're burying all the parking below the building, allowing that your streetscape to primarily be addressed with the beauty of the facade of the building. And speaking of the facade, you get to really start to see how a lot of that detailing comes together. Timber walls right there with a cavity, and then you start to swing over and see all of the mineral wool insulation, and then you have the furring on top, which will be in preparation for the future facade. And you can even see that underneath they've installed mineral wool with these big plastic washers and fastener up into the concrete. But one thing that I haven't noticed in the US with this mineral wool, and I think you can see it here, Doug, is it actually is tongue and groove. So it really locks together really nicely, especially in the facade here. It would probably make the install a lot nicer, a lot tighter, and give the opportunity to rely on just friction fit or even fasteners when you're going up a wall. You can kind of stack it and let that tongue and groove do its magic. The product, I'm not sure who manufactures it, but I'm sure we can find that somewhere else on the site. Either way, guys, this is stop number 2 from the job site tour in Switzerland. Big thank you to Siga Swiss and Siga North America for having us. Obviously the general contractor for letting us walk and tour the site. My intention as a builder and why I'm here is to understand how people are building in different parts of the world and take little tidbits and understand how we can improve as a builder and be a better builder back in the US and of course more specifically for all of our clients. So thanks for watching. We'll see you guys soon.